In Acts chapter 11, I kind of hinted at it when I led that song, that this is my Father's world. We look here in Acts chapter 11, and we're all very familiar, at least I hope we are, that in Acts chapter 11, verse 26, we read that this is the first account that we read that we are called Christians. When you think about God's creation, has a bird ever have to tell you it's a bird? Has it ever had to convince you it was a bird? Or does it just get up and fly? When I was reading an article the other day, and it struck me, I kind of had an epiphany, that I have started to develop a taste for the word religion. Because when you think about the word religion, that's a man-made construct. Because, you have a conversation with somebody, and they say, so what are you? Well, are you a Christian? Well, yeah, but are you Baptist? Are you Catholic? What are you? And really, our response should be, I'm a follower of Christ. Not a title of Christian, and not, I'm a Church of Christ member. That's not who we are. Who we are is God's creation, and we are followers of God, and we are followers of Christ, and that shouldn't be something we have to convince people of. Going back to the illustration of you never had to have a bird tell you it was a bird, it just got up and flew. If we are having to convince those around us that we're Christians and that we're followers of Christ, then brethren, we are failing. If we have to convince somebody that we are who we say we are, then we're not really who we say we are. We're frauds. We're failing. And when we think about that, I was thinking about this myself, and there's been a lot of changes happening in my life here lately. Just a lot of things happening. And, there's a lot of comfort in knowing the God that we serve, and a lot of peace, but there's also a lot of fear of what might happen if at the end of this life I haven't upheld my end of the deal. Because God already upheld his end of the deal. He sent his son, his one and only son, the one that we didn't deserve, and he gave him to us anyway. Not just that, but then he gave us an instruction manual. If sacrificing his son wasn't enough, he took the time for the past 2,000 years and however many thousands of years before that to give us the Old and the New Testament, and to give us a book that showed us what happens when you do right, what happens when you do wrong, and made a whole testament about it, the whole Old Testament. From Genesis to Malachi, it is all about what happens when you follow God and what happens when you disobey. And then he gave us a very specific, laid out plan from Matthew to Revelation of how we can be pleasing and acceptable to him. It made me think of the difference between knowing the principles of something and knowing it in practice. And knowing what the context of an instruction manual is, and knowing it by heart. I think anybody here, Dan, Byron, and lots of us, I remember when I was 8 years old, I could understand the concept of a motor, an engine. It needs air, it needs fuel, and it needs sparks. And if it has those three things, in theory, it should run. But knowing the difference between that and knowing, your pistons have to go down, and it has an intake, and then a power, then an exhaust stroke, and lots of things have to happen. There's a difference between knowing the principles and knowing the science behind it. And there's a difference between knowing what God wants. Okay, he wants me to be baptized, and he wants me to, not make all these mistakes, not commit all these sins. But to know that and to know God are two entirely different things. And to understand God the way he has written the Bible for us to understand him, and as much as we can possibly fathom, because we can never completely understand God. It's beyond our comprehension. But then to know the instruction manual and know, well, if I go into Acts chapter 2, it tells me, you're supposed to be baptized. Well, you can do that with anything in the world. I can go to my instruction manual on my old pickup, and I can tell you where the headlights are at. But why they work is something I have to find out for myself. We can understand what God wants, but putting it in practice is something entirely different. And if we're truly putting it in practice, we shouldn't have to justify it to anyone. Those are just a few thoughts I had tonight. So if there's anyone here tonight that maybe you've had to explain yourself, or maybe you're finding yourself only knowing the principles. If that's something you struggle with, that's something we can all help each other with. If there's any need this evening, we ask you to please come to the front as we stand and sing. And